Hey guys, Foxdrop here, welcome back to another episode of our Strange Geezer Talks in the Corner gameplay in the background. We're talking today about a cheeky tactic that you guys can be using to abuse the enemy jungler for free elo in solo queue. This is pretty much just going to be revolving around making the enemy jungler's day a complete nightmare, and is more geared towards kind of less direct impact on the game from like ganking lanes, which can be kind of unreliable at times, and more the intricacies of indirect pressure in your team's favor. Now that may sound like a really weird kind of way to put it and some buzzwords going on there, but essentially I'm going to explain everything in this video, don't you worry about it. It basically just means that you're going to be able to kind of win games in a non-traditional sense and still be a more reliable way to win games. Because if you're just ganking all the time, sometimes that can muck up and then you're pretty screwed if your ganks don't go too well. If you're playing really aggressive, it's like high risk, high reward. This is a little less like that. Now, this kind of video, I like to do this kind of video when I'm talking about some more complex themes, but don't worry, like I said, I will explain things. And if you do find this video useful, don't forget to hit that cheeky thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. However, with all that boring stuff out of the way, let's get straight cracking on with the video. The first thing we want to be doing to abuse the enemy jungler, the very first step, quite an important step in fact, you're going to be picking a champion that is very good in these 1v1s that can abuse the enemy jungler. Obviously you need to be picking a champion that can abuse the enemy jungler. You don't want to be taking Soraka jungle and then trying to abuse the enemy jungler. It's not going to work. Soraka jungle can't do that. So specifically the champions that I recommend for this are Shyvana, Skarner and Graves. Now I think this is a good balance between people that aren't picked very frequently and people who are very good in the 1v1s. In fact, I think Skarner and Shyvana are two of the strongest 1v1 champions in the game, and Graves is someone who's very good in 1v1s, but more specifically can farm up really fast to make him he's like always ahead of the enemy jungler. These are also all very low risk champions, not particularly hard to play. They are champions that aren't particularly in meta either, but that doesn't make them bad. They're good for solo queue, very good for solo queue, but they're not meta, which means that they're not going to be picked away from you too much. And they also tend to kick meta junglers' asses quite hard. If you're thinking about a lot of the meta champions that you're seeing, all of these champions can just beat the shit out of them in a 1v1. They can bully them around if they want to. Some exceptions, like if an enemy Kha'Zix, gets like really fed or something like that, might be a little bit hard to do, but generally speaking, you should be pretty solid picking these champions. Now, outside of the champions that you've been picking, you're going to be wanting to take red Smite if you want to, but blue Smite if you really don't need the red Smite. Red Smite allows you to have really strong 1v1s. It's almost impossible to lose a 1v1 if you've got that red Smite advantage on someone. If you can red Smite someone and they don't have red Smite, you can't lose. You generally can't lose. You take less damage and you deal more damage. It's a really solid Smite option to go for. However, like I say, if you don't need it, if you're just stomping the enemy jungler, or you think that you're in such a ridiculously powerful matchup, like he's picked something like, I don't know, a Mumu or something really weak in the early game, and you're this Shyvana, you don't need the red Smite necessarily. You can opt for the blue Smite. And this leads us into the next point that I want to talk about more about how to actually play this strategy. The reason why blue Smite can be quite useful is because what you're going to be wanting to do as far as pressuring lanes go, because you're not going to be doing too much of that, but what you will want to do a little bit of it is to be camping your mid lane. That is pretty much all you want to do for this strategy. You don't really want to be ganking bot, you don't really want to be ganking top. Of course you can do it if you find like a really easy opportunity to do so, but don't focus on that. You really want a hard camp mid lane, and blue Smite really helps you to do that. The reason why you want a hard camp mid lane is because it's going to enable all of this invading plays that you're going to be making, which we'll talk about a bit later on. Essentially, if you control the mid lane, you can control the whole map, because the mid laner is the champion that can roam around the whole map. He's the champion that's going to be invading with you. He's the champion who's going to be backing up you. He's going to be backing you up if you're invading, and likewise, of course, the enemy mid laner is going to be backing up the enemy jungler. So if you have a weak enemy mid laner, a strong allied mid laner, that's going to be perfect for you to set up these invade plays to make everything go a bit smoother. On top of that as well, if you're not ganking lanes too much, which you won't be doing with this strategy, if you're not ganking lanes too much yourself, the mid laner is the perfect lane to go and roam to apply pressure to these other lanes. So the mid laner can roam to top lane, shit on that kid, he can move down the bot lane, shit on those kids as well. So he can essentially take your role as the roaming ganking jungler if you get him far enough ahead where he doesn't have to worry about his lane anymore and he can just run around. Now, I mentioned a bit before about invading. That is the core premise of this strategy. You want to be invading frequently. Now, invading the enemy jungler is this is going to completely ruin his day. And what you want to be looking for when you're doing this is, if you don't see the enemy jungler, take his jungle camps. If you do see the enemy jungler, just run at him and just smack him around the mouth as much as you can. Like, just fight the enemy jungler 24/7. You don't have to kill him, you don't have to blow his summoners. If you fight the enemy jungler and you chunk him for like half his health, you screwed him over pretty hard, believe me, especially in the early game. You don't even need to do like massive amounts to him, but just pressure him as hard as you can. The more pressure that enemy jungler feels, the less pressure he's going to be applying to your lanes. Even if, like I say, you don't like kill him, you don't get summoners, I can guarantee you right now that junglers in solo queue, especially in lower elo, but honestly this applies to every single elo all the way up to challenger, junglers, if they feel pressure on themselves, will play very selfish. Junglers in general are very selfish players. I would know, I am a jungle main myself. So they're going to be wanting to look after themselves first, as opposed to looking after their team. So if they find themselves under pressure, they are going to be looking after themselves, and they're going to be making sure that they can like get enough jungle camps. That if you're threatening an invade on their buffs, then they're going to make sure that they're there on time to defend their buff. They're not going to be applying pressure onto those lanes. So that's really what you need to do. Now, if you see the enemy jungler in a lane, if you see him gank top, if you see him gank bot, invade him. If you're on the top side already, go to his top side jungle and just try and take away everything that you can. If you're on the bot side, don't run to counter the gank, run into his jungle and try and meet him as he comes back into the jungle, or just try and take his jungle camps while he's ganking. Or if you think he's going to be running up into the river, wait in a river bush. Just whenever you can see the enemy jungler, just try and fight him. Just make his life a living hell. Keep your eyes peeled on the minimap for that. Whenever you see the enemy jungler, just go for him. On top of that as well, vision is very useful. Keep your warding trinket. I would suggest to keep your warding trinket for this whole game, just to stick your wards down the enemy jungle. Then you'll see where he is, and even if you don't see him, if you've got wards in the bot side jungle and you don't see him on those wards, you can pretty much guess he's in the top side jungle. So you don't actually even need to see where he is on those wards, because you can guess where he is even if you don't see him. Now, outside of that, what you're going to want to do here, like just some more like minor details about how you want to play. Don't focus on kills when you're ganking. I would suggest to only really get, unless it's mid lane of course, if you're ganking like top lane or bot lane specifically, only really go for those lanes when you feel like you can transition that into something else, specifically objectives, obviously towers or dragon or rift herald. So if you feel like you can get some kills in bot lane, or if you feel like you can just like push the enemy bot lane out of the lane and then roam in and just like push down that tower, get some damage onto the tower, that's good use of your time. Look to do that. If you think you can push the enemy bot lane out of their lane and then go and take dragon, likewise do that too. To be honest as well though, these champions that you'll be picking for this strategy do tend to be quite good at taking away dragon by themselves anyway, so you don't really need too much help for that. Just put like a pink ward down or something on the dragon and you can probably sneak it away as well. Outside of that though, Rift Herald I think is a really important thing to be getting for this strategy too. If you find the enemy jungler in the bot side and Rift Herald is up, go to that Rift Herald and try and take it away. If you see the enemy top lane is dead, for example, as well, go to the Rift Herald and try and take that away. If you can give this over to your top lane as well, you don't want it yourself, you want it to give it to the top laner. The reason for that as well is because the less emphasis you put on yourself to carry, the better it is in this strategy, because you're not going to be necessarily wanting to directly impact the lanes too much. So if you give this Rift Herald buff over to your top laner, that top laner is sorted. He doesn't have to worry anymore about his lane. You don't have to worry about helping him too much either. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So essentially that's kind of the core of this strategy. It's invading 24/7. The enemy jungler won't be having anywhere near as much pressure on the lanes as you'll usually see in your games. And the reason why I think this is quite a reliable way to be playing as well is because, like I said earlier, ganks can go wrong. Ganks can, if you're playing really aggressive, you can muck those up. You can get counter ganked. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes your allies don't really work with you. With this strategy, you don't need to rely on allies whatsoever. And also it means that your allies are much less likely to feed their lanes, because enemy junglers aren't going to be influencing their lanes either. And of course your allies will still probably maybe feed just by themselves. It's solo queue, of course that happens, but they'll be feeding a little bit less because the enemy jungler won't be there. And of course, this strategy revolves all around the enemy jungler being pretty greedy, pretty selfish, and not being able to... I mean, maybe being a little bit harsh there. In theory, I think the enemy jungler's first thought is probably he's the one who needs to look after himself, right? So he's going to be looking after himself first. He won't be helping his lanes as much. But on top of that, you will be screwing him over a lot. So it's pretty expected that he would want to help himself out. And the best thing about this as well, if the enemy jungler isn't ganking, then that means that his team's going to be raging at him. And if his team rage at him, as soon as the team starts raging in solo queue, the game's pretty much over. So extra bit of sauce on top of that one. So all good stuff. Anyway, that's pretty much what I want to say for this video, guys. Let me know what you thought about it down below in the comments. Hope you found this video useful. It is a pretty good strategy to be using this in solo queue. I think it's, you know, the more of a terror you can be for the enemy jungler, the better it is for your team overall. Because the enemy jungler is the playmaker. If you stop the playmaker, then you stop a lot of things from happening, and you can find yourself in a really good spot, a really good position for solo queue. But anyway, let me know what you thought about this, like I said, down below. Like the video if you found it useful. You can subscribe to me for more League of Legends content. But most importantly, boys and girls, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. And I will see you in my next video.